Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
It was upon one of those March evenings when London, wrapped in a wet and breathless fog, seems to draw its own breath with effort, that the matter first came to our attention. The lamps along Baker Street swam as dull stars in a yellow firmament, and the incessant patter at the panes made our fire the more companionable. Holmes had spent the better part of the afternoon in what he termed a trifling experiment in vibration, tapping with a bow upon a graduated series of glass rods, and noting their responses with that remote absorption which could make a cathedral of the most meagre laboratory. As for myself, I had settled with medical conscience into an armchair and an article in the Lancet when a sudden rap, firm, urgent, and oddly timed, sounded at our door. Mrs. Hudson, who tolerates interruption only when mystery threatens to stain the carpets, ushered in Inspector Lestrade of the Yard, the fog clinging to his coat like a damp verdict. "You look as if London has been wrung out upon your shoulders, Lestrade," Holmes observed without rising. "Pray warm yourself. Tea, or shall we skip the pretence and come at once to the matter?" Lestrade cast a glance at me, another at the row of glass rods, and then at Holmes, whose grey eyes had already kindled. "I'll take the matter," said he. "We've a death in Knightsbridge that refuses to learn its manners. Sir Julius Armitage, retired magistrate, found at the foot of his own staircase an hour after dusk. No marks upon the body worth the name, no sign of intruder, no upturned furniture, no broken locks. Only a head, neck, and spine that seemed to have made an ill friendship with the last 5 steps. Holmes steepled his fingers and considered the fire. "Falling upon stairs is a very common way for a man to reach eternity, Lestrade. What is uncommon?" Lestrade frowned. "The witnesses, Mr. Holmes. 2 of them, and neither can keep from telling me what they heard. The same queer thing, a knocking, hollow like someone drumming upon a packing case, just before Sir Julius cried out. 3 knocks even, measured as if by a metronome, yet there's no room below those stairs to make such a sound. No cellar there, only the wall dividing the hall from the drawing-room." Holmes's gaze slid to the window, where the fog pressed like a curious face. "Hollow knocks preceding a fall, a house without a cellar, no intruder, a magistrate. Go on." "The household is small," Lestrade continued. "Lady Armitage, second wife, was at her dressing-table upstairs at the time. A companion, Miss Ida Bell, was reading in the morning-room across the hall. The butler, Bligh, and a footman, Carter, were about their duties. Sir Julius had returned from his club not 10 minutes before. He was to dine with his wife at 8. "And the staircase?" "A broad, handsome affair," said Lestrade, "oak, and polished within an inch of self-regard. 12 steps to the landing, then a turn, and another 6 to the upper corridor. Sir Julius fell from the lower flight. He lies at St. Albans Hospital now, if lies it can be called." Holmes's fingers came to rest upon his knee. "He lives?" "Barely. The surgeon holds out no hope that he'll speak sense again if he speaks at all." Lestrade cleared his throat. "I might have spared you the trouble, Mr. Holmes, if not for the noises. The servants swear they've heard them other nights. Always 3 knocks. Hollow, as I say. Sir Julius had complained of them. Bligh told me the master said once, 'They knock from the wall to empty the house.'" Holmes was upon his feet. "They knock from the wall to empty the house," he repeated softly, as if weighing each word for false coin. "And yet the house was not empty, only one man's life was. We shall go, Watson. The fog will assist us. It makes London one great ear." Within the half-hour, we were jolting through that viscous sea in a cab whose lamp sliced little trenches of light into it. Knightsbridge, with its sober facades and iron railings glistening like wet ink, received us as if we were late to a performance. Armitage House stood a little back from the street, 3 stories of respectable brick whose very shutters looked judicial. A policeman admitted us, and we were shown at once into the hall, where a black strip had been temporarily laid upon the polished wood, a funereal river running to the foot of the staircase. Holmes paused there and removed his hat with a gravity which, in him, is always the preface to exactness. "No one is to ascend or descend," he said quietly to Lestrade, who nodded a signal to the constable. "Watson, note the rail. Lestrade, a lamp, if you please." At the first glance, there was nothing to be seen. The rise and run of the steps were gentle, the balusters, turned in a modest pattern, shone with beeswax. A tall clock upon the landing counted the seconds with a steady indifference, yet Holmes's attention moved in those brief, precise darts I have learned to fear, for each is the nib of a pen set to draft an indictment. He knelt upon the 3rd step from the bottom and held his face an inch from the tread. "There," he murmured, "and there." He touched 2 points with the tip of his forefinger, then examined that finger against the lamp. A smear transparent, not water, a polish, yes, but one that sits atop the wax. Something with a stiffness when dry. "More beeswax?" I ventured. Holmes's mouth inclined. "Beeswax is a faithful servant. This is an upstart. Note, too, the rail. Only from the middle height to the newel is it brighter than the rest. One might call that merely the reach of a shorter hand. But the newel cap, feel it." I did so and started. "Cold. And damp. More than the surrounding wood, though the air is all damp," Holmes concluded. "We will remember that. Inspector, show me where Sir Julius lay." Lestrade indicated a chalk outline upon the black runner. The droop was horribly natural, as if the man had sat down to rest, and found rest too complete. I bent out of habit, and noted the absence of blood or displaced splinters. The skull had met no corner, the bones no edges. "It is as I said," Lestrade remarked, "a fall without war, a surrender." Holmes had moved to the wall which ran beneath the right-hand side of the staircase. He placed his ear against it and tapped lightly with his knuckles at measured intervals, 1, 2, 3. In the hush that followed, the old clock on the landing seemed suddenly obtrusive. The wall gave back a tone faintly different from the panels flanking it, as if a violin string tuned a degree off had been plucked amidst a choir. "Hollow," said Holmes, so low that the word was hardly sound. He changed his position, rapped again, and then crouched to peer along the edge where the skirting board met the first riser. "Watson, your penknife." He slid the blade into a crease I would have sworn was but a shadow, worked it with patience, and at last a narrow sliver of wood, not longer than a finger, yielded like a trap admitting a mouse. "A panel," Lestrade blurted. "A seam," Holmes corrected, replacing the sliver delicately. "Not visible unless one looks from below, with the lamp skewed to make enemies of light and angle. You will notice also, and here he inclined the lamp so that its glow skimmed the treads. The 5th and 7th steps differ minutely in their sheen, though not in colour. The grain, too, is cross in the 7th, where it is straight elsewhere. We shall not guess, we shall listen." He extinguished the lamp, and to my surprise, gestured that we should all be still. The house did us the courtesy of holding its breath. From far within came the ghost of a draught, which my skin felt before my ears knew it. The flame of a bracket candle across the hall leaned and recovered as if bowing to a court. "Through," Holmes whispered. "There is air moving through the staircase." Lestrade made a discontented sound. "You think there is a chamber under the steps, but I tell you, Mr. Holmes, it's solid wall according to the plans, and the house is 60 years standing." "I think nothing," Holmes returned evenly. I observe. We have the testimony of 3 knocks heard by 2 witnesses and complained of by a third. We have a staircase that breathes when it should only stand. We have a rail damp to the touch where its neighbours are merely cool. We have a magistrate who said the knocks were designed to empty the house. These facts must shake hands eventually. At that moment there came a slight commotion at the doorway, and a lady entered with the agitation of one who has been taught, and taught well, to govern it. She was handsome, perhaps 35, with the kind of beauty which looks back at one in the glass to negotiate terms. A veil damp with fog clung to her cheek. "Inspector," she said, and her voice was crisp china, "you have not told me you would be tearing up my house at midnight." "We are not tearing up anything, Lady Armitage," Lestrade answered, a trifle stiffly. "This is Mr. Sherlock Holmes." Her eyes moved to my companion with interest tempered by scepticism, not the first time I had seen those 2 in attendance upon his name. "Mr. Holmes, I cannot have my home subjected to inquiry?" Holmes bowed. "Madam, I never put a house to more pain than its owner has already inflicted. I must, however, ask you to permit me 3 liberties, that I may examine your morning room, that I may speak to your staff, and that I may hear from your own recollection what exactly you did and did not hear at the moment of your husband's accident." She hesitated the space of a breath. "It was not an accident," she said. The hand upon her reticule trembled once, then stilled. "One does not knock upon the air by accident." Holmes inclined his head. "A sentiment to my purpose, if you will allow me—" But she had drawn herself up. "You shall have your staff. As for me, I will speak in the morning." With that she turned, and the fog devoured her again. Holmes watched the doorway as though it had offered him a cipher. "There is always more in what is withheld than in what is said," he murmured. "Come, Lestrade. Show me the morning room and see that Bligh and the footman are within reach. Watson, keep your eyes upon the 5th and 7th treads. I fancy they will repay our attention before the night is over." And as I obeyed, the old clock upon the landing told the quarter, its tone rolling down the stair as if from within the wood itself, deep, measured, and, to my ear, just a little hollow. Lestrade, with a muttered word to the constable, led us into the morning room. The air there was warmer, scented faintly with coal and lavender polish, though the fog pressed stubbornly at the panes. The chamber was modestly furnished with a writing desk, 2 chairs, and a carpet that showed no traffic of the evening. Miss Ida Bell, the companion, rose at our entrance. She was a pale, serious woman of perhaps 25, her figure slim, her manner one of timid correctness. "Miss Bell," Holmes began without preamble, "you were seated here when Sir Julius fell?" "Yes, sir. I was reading aloud from the Ladies' Gazette. The door was open, and I heard the sound, 3 knocks as though struck upon a chest. I looked up, startled, and then came Sir Julius's cry. I ran out, but by then he was already at the foot of the stairs." "Describe the knocks precisely, if you please. Were they sharp, dull, metallic, wooden?" She closed her eyes briefly as if to recall. "Not metallic, sir, and not like the usual creak of steps, hollow but deliberate, as though someone within the wall struck thrice with their fist." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And you saw no one enter or leave the hall in that moment?" "No, sir. I should have seen. The hall was lit." Holmes inclined his head. "You have been companion to Lady Armitage long?" 2 years, sir, since her marriage." "And you have heard these knocks before?" Miss Bell hesitated, then nodded. "Twice. The first time last month, and again only last week. Each time Sir Julius was disturbed. He told Lady Armitage the house was built upon trickery. though I confess I did not understand his meaning. Holmes turned slightly, so that his keen profile caught the glow of the fire. "That will do for the moment. You have been most helpful, Miss Bell. Inspector, the butler next." Bligh appeared, an elderly man whose face was as lined and stiff as the starch in his collar. His tone was respectful, though there lay in it that faint resentment of a servant forced to air household secrets. "You served Sir Julius long?" Holmes asked. 18 years, sir, before the present lady and before his retirement." "Tell me about these knocks." Bligh's expression hardened. "They began scarcely a month ago. I myself heard them on 2 occasions, always 3, and always from the same portion of the stair. Sir Julius was troubled. He believed someone meant to drive him from his house." "Someone within?" Holmes pressed. "I could not say, sir. But the master spoke to me once in confidence. He said, 'Bligh, a judge makes enemies, but never so many as when he thinks himself secure.' I thought he meant his days upon the bench." "Did he fear anyone in particular?" Bligh hesitated. "He spoke often of a fellow named Rayner, convicted of forgery 5 years past." Sir Julius presided. The man swore vengeance in court. "But he was transported, sir?" "Australia." Holmes nodded thoughtfully, but said no more. His gaze returned to the stair visible through the half-open door, as if listening for echoes no one else could hear. The footman, Carter, was next. He was a ruddy-faced youth, plainly nervous under our scrutiny. His tale differed little. He had heard the knocks once, though he had thought them the house settling in the night. He had been polishing silver at the time of the accident, and ran in only when Miss Bell screamed. Holmes dismissed him, then walked again into the hall. He placed his palm once more against the rail, lingering where the damp had gathered, then crouched and pressed his ear to the 5th step. His eyes half closed, and for a moment he seemed a statue listening to the wood itself. "There is movement beneath," he said at last. "Not constant, but enough. Lestrade, if you place your weight upon the 3rd tread, gently, there. Did you hear it?" Indeed, we all did, a faint, resonant thump, as though from a cavity struck in answer. Lestrade frowned. "Ingenious carpentry, perhaps, but to what end?" "That," Holmes said, rising with sudden energy, "is precisely what we shall learn. A hollow staircase is a message written in wood. Someone composed it, someone now plays it. The knocks are a signal." Before more could be said, the tall clock upon the landing began to strike the hour. Its chime rolled down with peculiar richness, so full that it seemed to travel through the stair itself. Holmes's gaze shot upward, then back to the steps. His hand went to his pocket watch, noting the time with military precision. "Inspector," he said abruptly, "have your constables keep every entrance secured. No one leaves until I have concluded my examination. Lady Armitage may object, but tell her it is to preserve the dignity of her house. Watson, stay close. I believe the night may yet provide us with another performance." And with that he seated himself upon a chair drawn to face the staircase, the lamplight striking sharp planes across his face, as though he awaited not merely suspects, but the very architecture to confess its secrets. The minutes passed in heavy silence, broken only by the steady tick of the landing clock and the faint whisper of the fog pressing at the windows. Holmes sat utterly motionless, his long fingers steepled before his lips, his gaze never leaving the staircase. I confess that in those moments I felt the uncanny weight of the house itself, as if the very timbers waited in expectation of some secret about to betray itself. Lestrade shifted restlessly upon his chair, impatient with this vigil, but too wary of Holmes's concentration to intrude upon it. At length, Holmes stirred. He rose, crossed the hall, and with deliberate tread ascended 2 steps. He pressed with the heel of his boot upon the fifth, and again there came that dull, hollow reverberation. Then, as he shifted his weight, the sound altered subtly, acquiring a resonance that caused the lamp flame nearby to quiver. He crouched, ear almost against the wood, then abruptly straightened and turned to us. "Observe," he said softly. "The staircase answers only to weight in a precise position. It is not random settling, but a contrivance." He descended again, pacing the hall with quick, nervous energy. His head bent forward, his arms clasped behind his back. He circled twice, then halted before the wall beneath the stair. Producing his lens, he examined the skirting board with microscopic attention, moving inch by inch until he paused at a particular joint. His finger traced it once, then he looked up. "Watson, your shoulder, if you please." I braced myself against the wall, and Holmes, standing upon me with a sudden spring, reached high to press upon a carved panel near the newel post. There was a faint click, and a portion of the skirting swung inward by the breadth of half an inch. Lestrade uttered an exclamation, but Holmes merely dropped lightly to the floor, and with a deft motion pulled the panel outward. Behind it yawned a narrow aperture, black as a well, exhaling a current of air, cold and stale. Within, a short flight of cramped wooden steps descended into the darkness. Holmes held the lamp to the opening, and its glow revealed the faint outline of a tunnel boarded in rough planks running beneath the hall. "A concealed passage," Holmes murmured. "So much for solid masonry, Inspector. This house holds within it a hollow body, a cavity for sound to travel and for men to move unseen." Lestrade bent forward, his face a mixture of triumph and suspicion. "Smuggler's work, perhaps, but what has that to do with Sir Julius's fall?" Holmes smiled thinly. "Everything. A staircase that knocks is no accident. Someone has learned to employ this passage as a means of communication or intimidation. The question is who?" He crouched again, inspecting the edges of the panel. Fresh scratches upon the wood. "It has been used within the week. Watson, mark how the draught carries the dust upon the floor. The disturbance is recent." Lestrade was already barking orders for a constable to fetch additional lamps. In a few minutes, the tunnel was sufficiently illuminated for exploration. Holmes led the way, stooping to avoid the low beams, his keen eyes flicking over every nail and joint. The passage wound beneath the stair, then turned sharply to the right, running parallel with the hall. After some 10 yards, it ended in a second panel fitted with a crude sliding bolt. Holmes tested it, and with a push, the panel opened into the drawing room. He stepped through, holding the lamp aloft, and we followed. The chamber was as dignified as the rest of the house, high ceiling, sombre portraits, and heavy draperies drawn against the fog. But Holmes's attention went at once to the section of wall adjoining the staircase. He tapped it gently. The sound rang hollow. "It is through this partition," he said, "that the knocks were produced. A man concealed here could strike the wood, and the resonance would carry through the stair like a drum. Consider the effect upon one already uneasy, especially a man burdened with enemies." Lestrade scowled. "Then the culprit hid here and waited? Yet how to prove it?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. He knelt, lifting the hem of the carpet. "Ah! Footprints, faint but distinct, in the pile. The impression of a narrow boot, not the heavy sole of a servant, nor the pointed slipper of a lady, more like the city shoe of a man of some station." At that moment footsteps approached, and Lady Armitage herself entered, her veil still damp with fog. Her eyes flashed as she beheld us examining the wall. "Mr. Holmes, Inspector, this intrusion has gone far enough. I cannot permit you to tear apart my home in search of phantoms." Holmes rose smoothly. "Phantoms, madam? Do not tread upon carpets, nor do they strike measured knocks. You will forgive me if truth takes precedence over appearances." She paled, but recovered instantly, her composure iron-clad. "You speak in riddles, sir. If you persist, in this invasion I shall consult my solicitor." Holmes bowed slightly. "By all means. Until then, I shall consult only the evidence. Watson, accompany me back to the stair." We returned to the hall, Lady Armitage's eyes burning into our backs. Holmes stood again before the staircase, gaze intent upon its polished steps. We have established the existence of a passage, a means of producing the sounds and footprints that betray recent use. What remains is to discover the purpose. Why should one torment Sir Julius with knocks upon his stair? To frighten him? To unnerve him into some rash act? Or to mask another design? He paced once more, then halted abruptly. "Consider, Watson, the peculiar damp upon the newel cap. Consider also the transparent smear upon the treads. These are not random, they are residues of preparation, of something applied to the wood." I started. "You mean something to cause a fall?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Precisely. A substance smeared upon the step to render it treacherous underfoot. Combined with the knocks to draw his attention and unbalance him, the effect would be fatal. Sir Julius did not merely fall, he was contrived to fall." Lestrade gave a low whistle. "Then it is attempted murder, not misadventure." "Attempted?" Holmes repeated. "We shall see. The magistrate yet breathes, though faintly. If he does not recover, the charge will be graver still." He turned once more to the concealed panel, his expression fierce with concentration. "Inspector, have your men guard both entrances to the passage. No one is to enter or leave without my knowledge. Tonight the hollow stairs have spoken, but before dawn I mean to hear the full tale they conceal." Holmes's command was obeyed at once, and constables were stationed at both ends of the hidden passage. The hall, though orderly in appearance, seemed now to quiver with unseen life, as though the very panels strained to speak. Lady Armitage had withdrawn in silence, her features rigid, but I noted the way her hand had trembled upon the reticule as she passed. Holmes, however, gave her no outward attention. His gaze remained fixed upon the staircase, as though it alone were his adversary. "Watson," he said abruptly, "we must learn not merely how Sir Julius fell, but why this elaborate contrivance was employed. Knocks alone would not suffice to overthrow a man of the law. They must serve as signal or distraction. To frighten is one thing, to engineer death is another. The two together suggest an intelligence of no small cunning." He bent once more to the fifth step, scraping delicately with his knife. Presently he held up a thin flake, glistening faintly in the lamplight. "See here. Resinous, faintly tacky, a varnish perhaps, or more precisely, an unguent applied for slipperiness. Observe the faint odour, camphor mixed with oil. Watson, you will note its presence upon my finger." I bent to smell and detected a pungent sharpness. Could such a mixture cause the foot to slide? With fatal certainty upon a polished tread such as this. Add to it the shock of a sudden knocking beneath one's feet, and even a strong man might stumble. Sir Julius was no longer young. His fall was engineered with care. Lestrade leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. But who within the house could contrive such a plan? The servants? The wife? The companion? Holmes's expression grew distant. "Not yet, Inspector. We must not condemn upon suspicion alone. The hand that prepared the step was deliberate, practiced, and likely familiar with chemical properties. It is not every butler or maid who possesses such knowledge. We must look deeper." At that moment a constable entered hurriedly. "Beg pardon, sir, but there's a physician just arrived from the hospital. He says Sir Julius has taken a turn." Holmes's head snapped round. "Is he conscious?" The man hesitated. The doctor believes he muttered a word, could not be certain. He thought it well you should know. Holmes seized his hat. "Come, Watson, Lestrade, keep the house secure. No one is to be admitted or dismissed. We shall return directly." The cab carried us swiftly through the fog-bound streets to St. Albans Hospital, its lamps throwing long spectral beams across the wet pavements. We were ushered into a dim ward where Sir Julius lay pale and motionless, his head swathed in bandages. A weary surgeon greeted us with a nod. "He's barely with us," the man said, "but as you see, he breathes. A few minutes ago he stirred, raised his lips, and seemed to form a word. I could not catch it." Holmes leaned close to the bed, his keen profile etched in the lamplight. "Sir Julius," he said softly, "if you hear me, it is Sherlock Holmes. Can you tell us who struck at you?" For a moment there was nothing. Then the magistrate's lips moved faintly and a sound emerged, ragged, barely audible. Holmes bent nearer still, his hand cupped to his ear. The syllables came again, distinct this time. "Bell! Bell!" The effort exhausted him. His head fell back, and he sank once more into stupor. Holmes straightened slowly, his face unreadable. I caught his glance, and my heart quickened. "Bell," he murmured, almost to himself. "The name is clear." The surgeon urged us away, and we withdrew into the corridor. I could not contain myself. "Holmes, surely he meant Miss Ida Bell, his companion's name. How else to interpret it?" "Indeed," Holmes replied, though his tone carried that infuriating reserve which signalled a deeper current of thought. "Yet we must not leap to the gallows upon a single syllable. Words uttered on the edge of consciousness are treacherous guides. Still we are obliged to treat it with gravity. We shall return at once." The cab bore us back through the thinning fog, and soon the grim facade of Armitage House loomed once more. Within, Lestrade awaited us impatiently. Holmes drew him aside and spoke in low tones, conveying what we had heard. The inspector's eyes hardened. "Then we must question the lady companion at once." Miss Ida Bell was summoned to the drawing-room. She entered quietly, hands folded, her face pale but steady. Holmes regarded her with that peculiar stillness which often disarmed the most hardened villain. "Miss Bell," he began, "I must ask you plainly, where were you before Sir Julius fell?" "As I told you, sir, in the morning-room. I heard the knocks and his cry." "And you did not stir from that chamber until you ran to the hall?" She clasped her hands tighter. "No, sir." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "Sir Julius has spoken. He uttered but one word, 'Bell.' What explanation do you offer?" Her lips parted, her breath caught audibly. For an instant I thought she would collapse, but she steadied herself, her eyes wide with shock. He spoke my name? Oh, merciful heaven! Mr. Holmes, I swear I had no hand in it. I have cared for him, honoured him, served Lady Armitage faithfully. If he named me, it was not in accusation. Perhaps he sought to call me, as he has done when in pain." Holmes studied her long and intently. At last he inclined his head. "Perhaps, and yet perhaps otherwise. We shall see." Lestrade stepped forward, his tone harsh. "You will remain within sight of my constables, Miss Bell, until this matter is resolved. If Sir Julius dies, your position will be a grave one." The young woman bowed her head, her whole frame trembling, but she made no protest. She was led away to her chamber under guard. When the door had closed, I turned upon Holmes. "Surely, Holmes, you cannot doubt her? She seemed the very picture of innocence." Holmes lit a cigarette, the smoke curling like thought itself around his sharp features. "My dear Watson, innocence and guilt are not costumes to be worn at will. They are threads woven into every action, every silence. Miss Bell's reaction was genuine enough, but whether of innocence or fear, that remains to be proved. The case tightens. The hollow stares have not yet spoken their last. Holmes stood for a long moment in the silent hall, the cigarette between his fingers burning to a thin column of ash. The faint draught from the hidden passage stirred the smoke into uneasy spirals, and I sensed that the air itself was charged with calculation. Lestrade, impatient as ever, paced heavily near the door, his boots striking the polished floor with unnecessary emphasis. Holmes flicked the ash into the grate and turned to us with that peculiar suddenness that always announced a new direction of thought. "There is a truth concealed in this house," he said. "Not merely in its passages or its polish, but in the relations of those who inhabit it. Miss Bell's name was upon the magistrate's lips. Whether as warning, appeal, or accusation, we must determine. Yet, to understand it, we must first understand the pattern of this household. Motive is the skeleton key." Lestrade gave a grunt. "Then let us question the wife again. She seemed none too pleased by your meddling." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Precisely why we must persist. Watson, you will observe closely. Lady Armitage is a woman accustomed to command her countenance. If there is a fissure, it will reveal itself not in her words, but in her smallest gestures." Lady Armitage was summoned to the drawing-room. She entered with stately composure, her gown of deep velvet trailing behind her like the conclusion of a formal argument. Her eyes moved from Holmes to Lestrade with cool defiance. "You send for me again, gentlemen," she said. "Surely this parade of suspicion cannot continue." Holmes inclined his head. "Madam, it is not suspicion but necessity. Your husband has spoken, faintly but distinctly, before lapsing once more into unconsciousness." Her composure wavered. A shadow passed over her face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "He spoke? What did he say?" Holmes regarded her steadily. "One word only. Bell." At this, her fingers tightened upon the folds of her gown. "Miss Bell? Impossible. She is devoted, loyal to the last fibre. My husband must have been calling for her assistance. He trusted her more than any servant." "Trusted?" Holmes's voice cut lightly, as a scalpel cuts. "Do you mean that he trusted her more than he trusted you, madam?" For the first time, a flush rose in her cheeks. "Sir, I will not have my fidelity impugned. My husband's confidence in his companion was of a practical kind. He was an old man in need of attendance I could not always provide. That is all." Holmes smiled faintly. "And yet the thought stirs you. Interesting. One further question. Were you aware of the concealed passage within your home?" She stiffened. "Passage? I know of no such thing." "Then you are singularly uninformed, madam. Your staircase is hollow, constructed to conceal a narrow corridor from which the knocks that tormented your husband were produced. Does this truly astonish you?" For an instant her eyes widened, then she drew herself up. "If such a passage exists, it is no work of mine. This house was my husband's long before I entered it. He never spoke of it." Holmes studied her in silence. At last he bowed. "That will suffice for the present. Thank you, madam." When she had gone, Lestrade muttered, "She's hiding something, I'd swear it, but whether guilt or pride, I cannot say." Holmes shook his head. "Not pride, Inspector. Fear. Did you not see how her hands moved when I spoke of the passage? She fears what may be found within, but it is not she who devised it." He moved swiftly now, lantern in hand, and led us once more into the hidden corridor. We followed the narrow planks to the drawing-room exit, then retraced our steps, feeling the draught upon our faces. Holmes halted midway, stooping low, his lamp illuminating the rough boards of the floor. With a sudden exclamation, he pressed his hand against a section, and the wood yielded. A smaller panel swung upward, revealing a recess scarcely large enough to admit a man lying prone. "See here," Holmes whispered. "A hiding place, cunningly contrived. Note the fragments of cloth caught upon the splinter. Dark wool, recent. Someone has secreted himself here within days, perhaps hours. The knocks may have been delivered from this very position, the assailant withdrawing before discovery." Lestrade bent, his eyes alight with grim satisfaction. "Then the culprit lurked here to unnerve the old man, and when the time came, he smeared the steps and waited for the fall. But who, Mr. Holmes, who among them could creep here unseen?" Holmes's gaze grew distant once more. "That is the final knot, yet observe, whoever used this place knew the house intimately. He or she was confident enough to move between walls, certain the secret would not be discovered. And he was not unskilled in chemistry, for the unguent upon the step was no common polish. Such qualities narrow our field considerably." He closed the panel and straightened. "We have now the how. The why will emerge once we examine Sir Julius's affairs. A magistrate makes many enemies, but only one who knew of this passage could translate vengeance into action. We must inquire into his papers." As we returned to the hall, a commotion sounded at the door. A constable entered, breathless, carrying a sealed envelope. "Message from the hospital, sir. Urgent." Holmes broke the seal. His eyes flicked across the page, and for an instant even he was shaken. "Sir Julius is dead," he said quietly. The words hung heavy in the hall. Lestrade cursed under his breath. "Then it is murder, murder beyond question." Holmes folded the paper carefully. "Yes, Inspector. And the stairs themselves are the instrument. But mark my words, before long they shall also be the witness." He turned toward the staircase once more, his face set in that austere expression I had seen only when the game reached its most perilous pitch. "We have the stage, the instrument, and the victim. The culprit must soon play his hand. Tonight we shall let the hollow stairs speak again, but this time we shall be listening." Holmes's declaration fell upon us like the toll of a bell, solemn and inescapable. Sir Julius was gone, and the hollow contrivance of his staircase had passed from curious riddle to grim evidence of murder. Lestrade, muttering darkly, ordered fresh guards to every entrance and began pacing like a caged animal. I confess a chill had settled upon me. The fog pressing at the windows seemed a pall drawn across the city, as if London herself knew of the crime within. Holmes, however, appeared more animated than ever, his eyes gleaming with that fierce light which signalled the chase was nearing its crisis. "Inspector," he said, "summon Bligh the butler at once. I would examine the habits of this household more closely." The old servant entered with grave composure, bowing stiffly to Holmes. "You sent for me, sir?" "Indeed. Tell me, Bligh, of the late magistrate's routine, his evenings, his guests, his correspondence." Bligh clasped his hands. "Sir Julius dined at his club thrice weekly, sir, and on other nights remained at home. He received few guests of late. His health was failing. As for correspondence, he was diligent. Letters came daily, chiefly from solicitors and acquaintances. I placed them upon his desk each morning." "And did he ever burn or destroy them?" "Occasionally, sir. He would read a letter, frown, and consign it to the fire. I thought them matters of business beyond my concern." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "You are correct. Beyond your concern, but not beyond mine. Where is his desk?" "In the library, sir, adjoining the drawing-room." Holmes motioned us to follow, and we entered the sombre chamber. Heavy shelves lined the walls, their volumes looming like silent jurors. A broad mahogany desk stood near the hearth, papers stacked in neat precision. Holmes seated himself, rifling through the documents with practiced speed, his long fingers pausing upon a letter sealed but not yet opened. He broke it carefully and scanned its contents, his expression tightening. "Listen, Watson," he said, and read aloud. "Sir Julius, your judgment destroyed my life. The years in exile have sharpened my resolve. You built your fortune upon the ruin of mine. When you hear the knocks, know they are mine also. Soon you will be emptied of this house as I was emptied of liberty." "Ah!" Lestrade leaned over his shoulder. "Rayner! The transported forger Bligh mentioned. Then he's returned from Australia." Holmes laid the letter down. "It seems so, but mark the choice of words. When you hear the knocks." The assailant knew of the hollow stair. Either he discovered it, or he was told. That narrows the circle. Few outside the household could possess such knowledge. Bligh's face paled. "Forgive me, sir, but if this man Rayner truly returned, he might have gained entry by stealth." "Perhaps," Holmes murmured, "yet entry leaves traces. Thus far I see none that could not be explained by the occupants themselves. Inspector, keep this letter secure. It will be our touchstone." He rose suddenly, his gaze alighting once more on the passage door within the skirting. "We must conduct an experiment. Watson, you and I shall station ourselves within this passage. Inspector, you will remain in the hall. If my conjecture is sound, the culprit must attempt once more to employ the stair. Grief and suspicion are sharp prods. The guilty seldom sleep when their work is half done." Lestrade grumbled, but agreed. Constables were set at each corner, the lamps turned low, and Holmes and I crept into the narrow corridor, closing the panel behind us. The air was close, carrying the scent of dust and age. We crouched in silence, Holmes motionless beside me, his eyes glinting in the lamplight of his pocket lantern, shaded so that only the faintest gleam showed. Minutes passed, long, tense minutes broken only by the ticking of the landing clock, muffled through the wood. Then, faint as a whisper, came the sound of movement. A board creaked above, followed by the soft scrape of leather upon wood. Holmes touched my arm, signalling silence. Through a crack in the partition we saw the hall dimly lit, Lestrade waiting in shadow. Then it came, the hollow knocks, 1, 2, 3, deliberate, measured, resonant, the very same that had haunted Sir Julius. They seemed to pulse through the wood, chilling in their precision. A figure moved at the base of the stair, half hidden by shadow. The hand that struck the wall was gloved. The posture was cautious, yet practiced. Holmes leaned forward, every sinew taut. "Now," he whispered, and flung open the panel. We burst into the hall as Lestrade lunged from the opposite side. The figure started, recoiled, and bolted for the door, but constables closed in. After a brief struggle, the intruder was dragged into the lamplight. It was Carter, the young footman. His ruddy face was contorted with fury, his eyes wild, yet beneath the rage lay unmistakable fear. Lestrade seized him by the collar. "So it's you! By heaven, boy, you'll hang for this!" Holmes raised a hand. "Steady, Inspector. Let us not leap to conclusions. Carter, why should you, a servant, ape the vengeance of a transported forger? Unless—" He paused, his gaze piercing. "Unless you are not the simple footman you appear. Speak truth, or truth will speak without you." Carter struggled, then sagged, his shoulders heaving. I only did what I was told," he muttered hoarsely. "I struck the knocks, nothing more. It was her idea." "Whose idea?" Lestrade barked. But Holmes's eyes were already narrowing, his mind racing ahead. "We shall let him tell us fully, Inspector. The hollow stairs have given us their voice tonight. Now let us see whose hand conducted their music." Carter stood between the constables, his chest rising and falling in uneven bursts. The lamplight revealed beads of sweat upon his brow, though the night was chill. Lestrade shook him by the collar with scant ceremony, but Holmes's quiet gesture stayed the inspector's hand. My companion's eyes, luminous and piercing, fixed themselves upon the young man with that peculiar intensity which often bent even the most obstinate to his will. "You say it was her idea," Holmes said softly. "Who is this her?" Carter's lips moved, but no sound emerged. He glanced once toward the staircase, then toward the upper floor, where the chambers lay, as if fearing some invisible presence. "Answer," Lestrade growled, tightening his grip. The footman swallowed. "Lady Armitage," he whispered. The name fell like a stone into the silence of the hall. Lestrade straightened with a curse, but Holmes remained unmoved, his expression unreadable. "Go on," he urged. "You will speak truthfully and without omission. What part did Lady Armitage play?" Carter's voice came halting, low, yet each word struck with the weight of confession. "She said the old man's days were numbered, that his heart was weak, his mind failing. She feared he would leave everything to Miss Bell. She told me I need only strike the knocks from within the passage, enough to unnerve him. She gave me coin, promised more, said it would be harmless." Holmes's brows rose the slightest fraction. "Harmless! And yet you smeared the steps." Carter shook his head violently. "No, sir, not I. I swear it. I never touched the stairs. I only did the knocking. The rest was not mine." "Then whose?" Holmes pressed. "I don't know. I swear it on my life. I kept to the passage as she bid me. The steps, whatever was done there, was another's work." Holmes fell silent, his fingers drumming lightly upon the newel cap, that cold, damp surface which had first betrayed its secret to him. His gaze travelled slowly upward, as though measuring each shadow of the house against Carter's words. Lestrade's patience broke. "It is enough, Mr. Holmes. We have the servant's confession, we have the magistrate dead, and we have the lady's name upon his lips before the end. I shall arrest her at once." Holmes turned sharply. "You shall do nothing of the sort. Arrest her now, and you arrest only a phantom of guilt, not its body. Consider, Sir Julius named Bell, not his wife. Carter swears Lady Armitage set him to knocking, but denies all part in the actual contrivance of the fall. There is a deeper hand, yet concealed, Inspector, one that uses both servant and lady as instruments. Until we draw it forth, any arrest would serve only the true culprit." Lestrade's mouth opened, then closed again. He knew enough of Holmes's triumphs to restrain his temper, though his scowl darkened like a gathering storm. Holmes dismissed Carter to the custody of 2 constables. "Guard him well, but gently. Fear makes men reckless." Then he turned to me. "Watson, you observed Miss Bell's reaction when we told her of the magistrate's final word. Terror, genuine beyond artifice. Such terror may spring from innocence, but it may equally spring from discovery. Tonight we shall learn which." At his bidding, Miss Bell was brought to the drawing-room. She entered pale and trembling, her eyes darting as though she already knew the weight of suspicion upon her. Holmes greeted her with grave courtesy, offering a chair, though she scarcely seemed aware of it. "Miss Bell," he began, his voice low and deliberate, "you have heard of Sir Julius's death." Her hand flew to her mouth. "He's gone?" "Oh, God forgive us all." Holmes inclined his head. "He spoke before the end. One word. Your name. What meaning do you attach to it?" She shook her head in anguish. "He trusted me. Always he called for me when in distress. That must have been his intent. It cannot be otherwise." "Perhaps," Holmes murmured. "And yet consider. You had opportunity. You were in the morning room when the fall occurred, yet close enough to the stair to act unseen. You had access to the household's medicines and compounds. The unguent upon the steps bore the pungency of camphor, an article not unfamiliar in a companion's cabinet. Miss Bell rose suddenly, her voice breaking. "No, I would never, I swear by heaven itself, I would never harm him. He was my benefactor, my only friend in this world. If he spoke my name, it was in need, not in blame." Holmes watched her keenly. "Your words ring true, and yet truth may wear many masks. Consider this, the plot employed both fear and artifice. The knocks by themselves would not suffice. The smear upon the stair was the fatal stroke. Carter admits to the first, denies the second. Lady Armitage is implicated in the first, yet her knowledge of chemistry is unlikely. Then who, Miss Bell, is left?" She stared at him, stricken, her lips moving soundlessly. Finally, in a whisper, "You think it was I?" Holmes said nothing. The silence stretched until she sank back into her chair, trembling uncontrollably. At length, Holmes turned away. "Inspector, we shall keep Miss Bell under watch, but not arrest. The web is intricate, and a premature snare may let the spider slip free. Tomorrow we shall test the stairs once more under new conditions. By then, the culprit's hand will betray itself." He extinguished the lamp and led us back into the hall. The clock on the landing struck 3, each note reverberating through the hollow wood with solemn finality. Holmes's face was lit a moment by its glow, severe, intent, and utterly absorbed in the pattern he alone discerned. "The stairs have spoken," he murmured. "But before this house sees another sunset, they shall reveal not merely a voice, but a name." The house settled into uneasy silence as dawn's pale light began to creep through the fog and stain the upper panes with a grey suggestion of morning. Lestrade had posted men at every door, and Carter remained locked in a small chamber under guard. Lady Armitage had withdrawn, refusing all further conversation, while Miss Bell sat weeping quietly in her room, the constables keeping a discreet but watchful eye upon her. Holmes, however, refused rest. He remained in the hall, pacing before the staircase, as if it were an adversary he meant to wear down by sheer persistence. I watched him from a chair, my own fatigue pressing heavily upon me. "Holmes," I ventured, "you have driven yourself the night through. Will you not take an hour's rest? The stairs will not vanish by daylight." He paused, eyes glittering in the dimness. "Rest, Watson, when the solution is within reach? No, fatigue is the small tax we pay for truth. Observe, every fact points to a hand within the household. Carter admitted to striking the knocks, yet claims ignorance of the smear. Lady Armitage stands accused by his testimony, but lacks the skill to compound the substance. Miss Bell possesses the knowledge, yet denies all. And Sir Julius himself, with his dying breath, named only Bell. All these fragments must form one mosaic. The question is, what figure does it depict? As if in answer, a constable entered bearing a small bundle. "Beg pardon, Mr. Holmes. While examining the companion's chamber, we found this under her dressing table." He placed the bundle upon the table and withdrew. Holmes unwrapped it carefully. Within lay a small jar half full of a clear, pungent ointment. He opened it, inhaled sharply, and held it toward me. "Smell, Watson, camphor with oil of turpentine and resin, the very mixture from the stair." My heart sank. "Then it was Miss Bell?" Holmes's lips pressed thin. "So it would appear. Yet appearances are precisely what we must distrust. Consider, Watson, the clumsiness of this concealment. Hidden beneath a dressing table, discovered within hours. Does this strike you as the act of one who planned so carefully? I shook my head, slowly. It seems rather planted, meant to incriminate. Precisely. Holmes closed the jar. Someone would have us believe Miss Bell guilty, but who had both motive and access? Carter was servant to all rooms. Lady Armitage, mistress of the house, could command any chamber. Each had means to place this jar. The question remains, who profited from Sir Julius's fall? At that moment Bligh the butler entered, grave and silent as ever. "Mr. Holmes, Lady Armitage requests a word with you in private, if you will permit." Holmes glanced at Lestrade, then at me. "Very well. Watson, you will accompany me. Inspector, remain here." I would not have the lady feel besieged. We found Lady Armitage in her boudoir, the curtains drawn, a lamp burning despite the pallid daylight. She sat erect, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but resolute. "Mr. Holmes," she began, "I have endured your questions, your intrusions, your suspicions, but I can endure no longer the thought that my companion should suffer blame for what she did not do. You must know she is innocent." Holmes bowed slightly. "Madam, you surprise me. Evidence has just been discovered in her room which strongly suggests her guilt." "I know of it," Lady Armitage said quickly. "I placed it there." Her words stunned me into silence. Even Holmes's composure flickered. "You confess to planting the jar?" "I do, not to injure her, but to protect myself. Carter is weak, pliable. He was in my pay, yes, I admit it. I bade him strike the knocks, nothing more. My husband was failing. I wished only to hasten the inheritance that was rightfully mine, but the rest, the fall, the smear upon the stair, that was not my doing. I thought if suspicion should arise, it might fall upon the companion rather than upon me." "That is my crime." Holmes regarded her keenly. "A crime of cowardice rather than murder, yet you claim ignorance of the fatal act?" "I swear it." Her voice trembled now, though her bearing remained firm. "I wished him unnerved, not destroyed. I thought the knocks alone would drive him to retreat from this house, perhaps even to the country. I did not wish his death." Holmes's gaze softened only a fraction. "Madam, whether your intent was death or terror, you set in motion the very chain that killed him. But you are correct. Another hand completed the design. The question is whose?" He rose abruptly. "Watson, remain with Lady Armitage. Inspector Lestrade must hear this confession at once. The web tightens. I see already the threads converging." He swept from the room with the air of one who sees the endgame upon the board. Lady Armitage sank back, her composure crumbling at last, and I could do little but watch in silence. In the hall below, I heard Holmes's voice sharp and clear as he recounted her words to Lestrade. Then came the inspector's exclamation, the shuffle of feet, and Holmes again addressing the constables. The house stirred as though awakened by some grim revelation. When Holmes returned, his face was stern, his manner brisk. "Watson, the final act is upon us. We must gather all, Lady Armitage, Miss Bell, Carter, and Bligh. The truth must be spoken aloud with every player upon the stage, for only in the full light shall the hollow stairs yield up their final secret." By Holmes's command, the household was assembled in the drawing-room, its air heavy with tension and the faint scent of extinguished lamps. The fog had lifted somewhat outside, letting through a pallid morning light, but within the chamber the atmosphere seemed thicker, as though every word and silence pressed upon us with equal weight. Lady Armitage sat rigidly upon a chair near the hearth, her veil lowered, the very image of defiance tempered by fear. Miss Bell, pale and trembling, occupied a seat apart, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Carter stood between two constables, his eyes darting nervously from face to face. Bligh the butler hovered near the door, as impassive as carved oak, though I thought his eyes betrayed a flicker of something darker. Holmes stood before them all, his long figure upright, his face grave, but alight with the peculiar fire of intellect. Lestrade, arms folded, leaned against the mantel, his expression a mixture of irritation and expectancy. I remained to the side, pen in hand, for I knew instinctively that Holmes was about to gather all the scattered fragments into their rightful order. "Ladies and gentlemen," Holmes began, his voice calm and resonant, "we stand in the presence of a crime conceived with subtlety and executed with precision. Sir Julius Armitage did not fall by mischance. He was lured to his death by artifice, by the knocks that echoed through this very staircase, and by the treachery of a substance spread upon the steps. Two forces combined, fear and deception. To discover the guilty hand, we must ask who had motive, who had opportunity, and who possessed the requisite skill." He turned first to Lady Armitage. "You, madam, have admitted to employing Carter to strike the knocks. Your motive was clear. You feared disinheritance, and you sought to unnerve your husband into relinquishing his hold upon this house. That is the measure of your guilt, yet the preparation of the steps required knowledge you do not possess. You planted evidence to direct suspicion elsewhere, but the fatal act was beyond your capacity." Her veil quivered, but she did not speak. Holmes's gaze shifted to Carter. "You, young man, obeyed her command. You crept into the passage and struck the knocks, playing your part in the charade. But your hands bear no trace of the resinous compound, nor your mind any knowledge of its preparation. You are guilty of cowardice, not of invention." Carter hung his head. Holmes's voice grew firmer. "Miss Bell, your position is more delicate. The dying magistrate uttered your name. A jar of ointment precisely matching that found upon the stair was discovered in your room. By appearances, the evidence points to you. But appearances, as I have said, are the deceiver's favourite tools. You had the knowledge, certainly. You could have compounded such a mixture. Yet I observed your shock, your terror, your anguish at the charge. They were not the feigned gestures of a practised deceiver. They were too raw, too human." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not interrupt. Finally, Holmes's eyes rested upon the butler, who had remained still as stone. His voice lowered, gaining intensity with each word. "Bligh, you alone escape mention, yet you are the constant presence. The faithful servant of 18 years, the hand that guided Sir Julius's habits, the guardian of his letters, the silent witness to his fears. You alone possessed the knowledge of the hidden recesses of this house, for you served long before Lady Armitage entered these walls. You alone had the composure to strike the balance between fear and fatality. You knew of Rayner's threats, for you delivered his letters. You alone could invoke his name, his shadow, to mask your own design." Bligh did not move, but a faint tremor passed through his hands. Holmes stepped closer. "Sir Julius feared vengeance, and you fed that fear. You constructed the knocks not merely to torment, but to convince him that his enemy's hand had reached across the seas. You compounded the ointment and smeared it upon the stair. When Lady Armitage set Carter to striking, you saw the perfect opportunity to fold her scheme into your own. Thus, when the magistrate fell, suspicion would scatter among many, while you stood apart, solemn and unsuspected." At last the butler spoke, his voice low, heavy as stone. "And why, sir, should I wish him dead?" Holmes's eyes blazed. "Because he held you in his power. You were more than servant, Bligh. You were once his clerk. dismissed for embezzlement 20 years ago. He spared you prison, but bound you to his service ever after, keeping your secret as a leash. You wore your livery as a penance, and the bitterness of it ate at you until nothing remained but the resolve to end it. You killed him, not for inheritance, not for passion, but for freedom. That is why you chose the hollow stair, the very symbol of the hollow years you spent beneath his command. A gasp escaped Lady Armitage. Miss Bell buried her face in her hands. Lestrade stepped forward, astonishment in his eyes. Bligh's mask cracked. His voice broke into a harsh whisper. He would never let me go, never. Each time I sought release, he reminded me of the past. I was chained to him, chained until death, and so I broke the chain. Lestrade seized him by the arm. You've confessed enough to swing you, Bligh. You'll answer to the law now. The butler straightened, his composure strangely restored. So be it. I have served one master too long. I shall serve another now. Holmes exhaled slowly, the fierce light fading from his eyes. The web is complete, Watson. Lady Armitage's folly, Carter's weakness, Miss Bell's misfortune, all were but threads in the loom, yet the pattern was woven by Bligh alone. The constables led the butler away. Silence fell heavily upon the room, broken only by Miss Bell's sobs and the crackle of the hearth. Holmes turned to me with a weary smile, his voice gentler now. Another life undone by the slow poison of resentment. The hollow stairs were but an instrument. The true hollowness lay within the man himself. The heavy door closed behind Bligh with a finality that seemed to drain the very air of the room. Lady Armitage sat rigid, her veil lowered as if to conceal more than her face, while Miss Bell, still trembling, stared at the hearth as though she dared not look anywhere else. Carter shifted uneasily under the constable's watch, his bravado spent. Lestrade exhaled through his teeth, shaking his head as though to rid it of the bewildering skein Holmes had just untangled. Holmes himself stood in silence for a long moment, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze lifted to the staircase whose polished steps had borne witness to so much fear and cunning. At last the house is unburdened of its secret, he said softly. Yet the hollowness remains. Murder leaves not merely a corpse, but an echo, one that lingers in the minds of those who live after. Each of you must reckon with that echo in your own way. Lestrade cleared his throat, unwilling to indulge in the philosophy. The case is closed, then. Bligh's confession will satisfy the Yard, and the courts will do the rest. Holmes's eyes flicked toward him. Closed, Inspector. A word too quickly spoken. Yes, the culprit has unmasked himself, but truth is not merely a confession. It is a chain of logic, each link tested until none can break. The confession only adorns the chain, it does not forge it. He moved to the desk where the damning letter from Rayner still lay. Picking it up, he held it delicately between his fingers. This, you see, was Bligh's final stroke of artifice. By invoking the name of Rayner, he sought to disguise his own vendetta as the vengeance of another. He knew Sir Julius would recall, that old enemy, that the memory of the man's threats would return in force. Yet the letter betrays its true author. The phrasing, emptied of liberty, is not the idiom of a transported felon, but the careful rhetoric of a man schooled in law, a clerk who had once handled magistrates' documents. It was Bligh's hand, not Rayner's. Lestrade muttered an oath. I might have known you'd sniff it out. Still, it was a neat scheme. Neat, but never perfect, Holmes replied. There is always a seam, Inspector, if one cares to find it. The uneven sheen upon the steps, the damp upon the newel, the concealed recess in the passage. Each was a whisper of the truth. Miss Bell raised her head timidly. Then, Sir Julius, when he spoke my name... Holmes regarded her kindly. "I believe, Miss Bell, that he called for you, as he had done many times before. His trust in you was genuine. The cruel chance was that his final word, stripped of its context, became a weapon in another's hand. Take comfort in knowing that he did not accuse you." Tears coursed down her cheeks, but her sobs quieted. Lady Armitage, by contrast, gave a bitter laugh, low and sharp. Comfort for her, perhaps, but for me, I am ruined. The world will say I plotted my husband's death, and though I did not, though I meant only to shake him, I shall bear the stain all my life. Holmes inclined his head gravely. "True, madam, one cannot bargain with guilt. Even the attempt at evil leaves its mark. Yet it is not the mark of the gallows. Your folly lies in fear and cowardice, not in the fatal act itself. The law will decide its course, but I suspect your punishment will be the whispers of society rather than the rope." Lestrade turned brusquely to his men. "Take Carter into custody as well. He'll answer for his part in the business. As for Lady Armitage, she'll remain at liberty until we've word from the magistrates." The household began to disperse under the direction of the yard, but Holmes lingered. He ascended the staircase slowly, his hand brushing the rail as though communing with it. At the landing he paused, gazing down upon us. "Watson," he called, "join me." I followed him upward, the polished wood creaking softly beneath our weight. He pointed to the 5th and 7th steps where he had first observed the smear. "Here," he said, "the plan revealed itself. Such trifles are the true language of crime, far more eloquent than a confession wrung from trembling lips. Never forget, Watson, that the smallest fibre may unravel the largest skein." We descended again, and Holmes addressed Lestrade once more. "See that the passage is sealed, its purpose is spent, and no good will ever come of a house with hollow bones." By midday the fog had lifted entirely, and the first shafts of honest sunlight broke through the tall windows of the hall. The constables departed with their prisoners, leaving the house strangely empty, its oppressive air replaced by an uncanny stillness. Lady Armitage withdrew to her chambers without a word, Miss Bell to her own, each bearing her private burden. Holmes and I stepped into the fresh air of Knightsbridge, where the streets glistened after the night's damp, and the city resumed its indifferent bustle. As the cab bore us away, I regarded my companion. His face, though composed, bore the faint lines of weariness that follow a night's relentless pursuit of truth. Yet in his eyes there remained that glint of satisfaction, the fire of a mind tested and triumphant. "You were right, Holmes," I said. "The hollow stairs did indeed speak at last. But I cannot help reflecting upon the tragedy of it, the wasted years, the bitterness that consumed a man until murder seemed his only release." Holmes leaned back, the ghost of a smile upon his lips. "Tragedy, Watson, is the inevitable companion of folly and weakness. Bly was hollow long before the stairs echoed his crime. Yet there is instruction even in tragedy. We are reminded that justice must rest not upon appearances nor upon passion, but upon the patient weaving of fact. Only then can the truth stand unassailable." The cab turned toward Baker Street, and the familiar outlines of our quarters came into view through the brightening air. Holmes tapped his cigarette upon the sill, then added, almost to himself, "The world is full of hollow stairs, my dear Watson. The task is ever to discern where they lead, and whether they end in safety or in the abyss." The day had slipped into late afternoon by the time we reached Baker Street, the familiar rooms welcoming us with the quiet comfort of books, smoke, and the tick of the mantel clock. Holmes cast aside his coat, filled his pipe, and sank into his armchair with that peculiar air of release which comes only when a mind has carried its quarry to the end of the chase. I, for my part, felt the weight of the night's vigil at last, though curiosity still stirred too strongly to permit rest. "You have brought the case to its conclusion, Holmes," I remarked, "and yet I sense in you some final thread of thought, as though the tapestry were not wholly finished." He smiled faintly, the blue smoke curling upward. "An apt observation, Watson. A case is not resolved merely by the apprehension of the criminal. It is resolved when its meaning is drawn forth, when each act is seen in its true proportion. Let us review it once more, if only for the satisfaction of completeness." I drew nearer, notebook ready, as he began his summation with the calm precision of a lecturer. "Consider first the sequence of events. We had a magistrate, Sir Julius Armitage, bound by his own severity and shadowed by old enemies. Into this web we introduced Lady Armitage, fearful of losing her position, who engaged Carter to strike the hollow knocks, thereby planting terror in her husband's mind. Her design was mischief, not murder. Yet her cowardice furnished the opportunity for another. Miss Bell, innocent yet vulnerable, became the perfect scapegoat. Her proximity to Sir Julius and her access to medicaments made her appear plausible as the culprit. It was easy enough for another to plant the ointment in her chamber and let the dying man's cry of "Bell" seal her doom. But the true hand lay elsewhere. Bligh, the butler, was the architect. He alone knew of the hidden recesses of the house, having served long before Lady Armitage entered it. He alone bore a grudge deep enough to endure decades. His life had been hollowed out by servitude, his pride consumed, until vengeance became his sole nourishment. It was he who smeared the steps, he who manipulated the knocks into something more sinister, and he who forged the letter from Rainer to cloak his crime in the guise of old vengeance. Each fragment pointed to him, once seen in proper relation. Holmes tapped the ash from his pipe. "Thus, Watson, the case resolves itself. Lady Armitage stands guilty of conspiracy and deceit, Carter of complicity, but the fatal blow belonged to Bligh. The hollow stairs were his voice, his rebellion against a master who held him in bondage of secrecy. In truth, it was not Rainer returned from exile, but Bligh risen from obscurity." I sat back, reflecting on the chain of events. "And Miss Bell, poor creature, is cleared at last. Yet I wonder, will the world believe in her innocence so readily? Gossip is a harsher judge than the law." Holmes's eyes softened. "The world may chatter, Watson, but facts endure. Her name will be restored by the courts, and her conscience knows its own purity. That is her safeguard. The rest is mere noise." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the fire crackling softly. At last I ventured, "Holmes, I marvel that such a small matter, a hollow sound upon a stair, should unravel into so grave a crime." He leaned back, his gaze upon the ceiling, as though addressing not me alone, but some invisible tribunal. "Small matters, my dear Watson, are the hinges upon which fate turns. A smear upon wood, a draught through a wall, a footfall in the night. These are the syllables of crime's hidden language. To the untrained ear, they are silence. To the trained, they are confession. That is the essence of our art." The clock chimed the hour, its tone mellow and unhurried. Holmes smiled faintly. "Sir Julius is gone, his servants scattered, his house forever altered. Yet the lesson remains. Where there are hollow stairs, there are hollow men, and it is our task to distinguish the echo of justice from the echo of deceit." He drew once more upon his pipe, the smoke wreathing about him like the final curtain upon a play. I laid down my pen, conscious that I had witnessed not merely the unmasking of a murderer, but the unmasking of a soul consumed by its own emptiness. The case of the hollow stairs was closed, yet its resonance lingered. a reminder that beneath the polish of every household there may lie cavities where darkness waits to speak.